Passion, purpose, possibilities. They're all right there. But sometimes we need a little push. And that's where SheSez comes in. Think of it as a master class taught by the world's most interesting women, sharing stories and ideas, because girlfriends help each other. This is SheSez with Linda Grasso. Hello and welcome to SheSez. Our guest today is Rabbi Naomi Levy. Naomi is the founder of Nashuva, a spiritual outreach community here in Los Angeles. It's for people who are looking for a non-traditional approach to practicing the Jewish faith. Naomi is also the author of 4 books. Her latest one, Einstein and the Rabbi, aims to help us reclaim our souls and feel a sense of unity in the world. Naomi, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure and honor, Linda.
I've really been looking, after reading your book, which I found so fascinating and so full of wisdom, I was really excited to have you here today. I want to get into the book in a second, but before that, I want to talk a little bit about your journey.
Mm-hmm.
So when we first spoke on the phone, you said that you had wanted to be a rabbi, or you found out you wanted to be a rabbi when you were about 4.
4 years old.
That is so wild. There weren't even female rabbis back then.
No.
What made you feel that?
You know, I just knew it in my bones, in my breath. I knew that I would be a rabbi. And people laughed, or some people even scolded me. Don't you know that's blasphemy for a girl to want to be a rabbi? But when people talk about the word calling, I do believe that I was called into this calling from a very young age.
Now, were your parents religious?
They were certainly people of faith, and they were very traditional Jews, yes. And they raised me to certainly be very proud and to love my tradition.
And did you tell your parents when you were younger, Mom, Dad, I'm thinking I want to be a rabbi?
Yes.
And what did they say?
You know, perhaps there was a little bit of laughter, and perhaps there was a little bit, that's adorable. And perhaps it would be like a little girl saying, I can't even imagine what it would be like, what that girl would be saying in our world today that would seem so preposterous. But at the same time, I do remember there was this kind of, okay, if you want that, we believe in you.
So you had
Which wasn't necessarily what other people said.
So you had a very tight-knit family. I remember reading in your book about how your parents they were a love match.
They were.
And you had a wonderful childhood until you were 15 when a big tragedy happened in your family. Your father was shot and killed during a robbery.
Mm-hmm.
Everything for you stopped at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that and how it changed your life, because you had an epiphany at that point. You were overwhelmed by grief, and then you started feeling your dad's presence.
Mm-hmm.
Share.
Well, I would say, when you say I want to be a rabbi, you know, people always ask me, as you did earlier, was your father a rabbi? Was it because your father was a rabbi? And no, my father was in the garment industry. He manufactured women's clothing, but he was my rabbi. And from the youngest age, he taught me how to pray. My bedtime stories were always Bible stories. And he would take me to synagogue with him, and I would sit beside him and play with the strands of his prayer shawl. And that was my life. That was my world. And when I was 15, my parents were walking down the street in Brooklyn, and a mugger came at them at gunpoint and shot my father. And my father's murder, the aftermath of that, was that so many things died, which I couldn't have imagined at the time. So it wasn't just that my father died. In many ways, my mother died. She wasn't the same woman. And every holiday died. And of course, the kid I was, who was just carefree, and she died, and prayer died, because I couldn't understand what those prayers meant anymore. And in many ways, God died too. I simply couldn't understand how the God that I loved, the God I believed in, the God who I was taught to believe in, would permit such a horrific thing to happen to such a wonderful person. And of course, the dream of becoming a rabbi died as well. And I walked around feeling very angry for several years. And it was when I was in college that I was just kind of minding my own business, walking on campus. And I started to sense the presence of my father with me. And at first, I just kind of ignored it, just shook it off. And then it just became stronger and stronger, like feeling your mom. That sense, the only way I can describe it is when you sort of tiptoe into your child's room and you're as quiet as a mouse, but the minute they sense you're there, their eyes pop open because they know somebody's looking at them. It was that sense of his presence hovering. And I remember thinking, I might be losing my mind. And sitting down with a mentor of mine, my college professor, and saying, I think I might need to be medicated. And he said, why would you think that? You know that you come from a tradition of people who were touched by a presence. Samuel and David and Deborah, and this isn't some sort of curse. Trust me, this is a gift.
With your faith intact, you decided to go to college. You went to Cornell, and I believe it was your senior year, they decided to let women into rabbinical school, correct?
Yes, the Jewish Theological Seminary voted to admit women for the first time into its rabbinical seminary.
Was there any trepidation on your part going into these uncharted waters?
When I heard that they were going to welcome women, I just was laughing and crying, and what were the chances that that was going to happen in my lifetime? And I knew I'd be there.
You must have had such a sense of camaraderie with the other women who were students at the same time.
Yeah. For me, it was like coming home. It was like completing a circle. And some of the women there I was fortunate. I was a senior in college when they voted to admit women. There were women who had other careers who'd been waiting for decades for this moment in time. So it was a really remarkable time. Really remarkable.
And when you first got out, you were the first female conservative rabbi to head a pulpit on the West Coast. You were in Venice.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't satisfying for you. Why?
Oh, no, it was satisfying.
Oh, it was? Okay.
Yeah. It was...
I was looking at the big picture that you sort of decided to go in a completely different direction, a non-traditional way. So it was satisfying at the time.
I was 26 years old, and it was remarkable. I loved it. I loved my community. I loved what I was doing. We were bringing in all these, new people into the community. And I guess the one thing I can say is there are very few synagogues that get foot traffic. But my synagogue was in Venice, a block from the ocean. So we get a lot of foot traffic, and I became very aware that people might be interested to see what we were doing, and they would sit there for maybe a minute, and then they leave. And I so wanted to know the outsider. I so wanted to know what was going on in their minds, in their hearts, because the service that I was leading was a service for insiders. It was for people who were already well established in the community, and it wasn't an easy service to access if you didn't know Hebrew or you weren't part of sort of the rhythm of Jewish life.
So were you able to get to know some of these outsiders, and what did you learn from them?
Well, I learned several things. I guess my first thought was that I had always imagined that unaffiliated Jews were atheists. And in speaking to so many unaffiliated Jews, I was hearing over and over again that they were deeply spiritual people And they didn't know how to find their spiritual center within Judaism. They could find it at the Zen center or at their yoga class, but they didn't know how to access it within Judaism. And another thing that I learned was that the majority of America's Jews are unaffiliated, and that we're losing so many Jews. The organized Jewish community is losing so many Jews. And I didn't want to feel that I never tried, that I didn't do anything to see if I could bring them back.
So what you're talking about apropos to the Jewish faith, but wouldn't you say that this is true in general for organized religion?
Yes.
I mean, because you could say that about the Catholic Church.
Yes, you can. Yes.
Many other.
I actually had a public dialogue with Cardinal Dolan in New York, and he said the largest group of Catholics in America are lapsed Catholics. So, yes, it's true all around.
So all of that led you to found Nashuva. It was this mindset that you have about sort of being more inclusive and more spiritual and not as, I almost want to use the word judgmental, and that sounds so negative. But when you're deep in a religion, I see very deeply religious people often judgmental about others who share a different faith or aren't as religious.
Well, I would say, first of all, the word Nashuva means we will return. And it felt like just the right name at the right time. And yes, the mission of Nashuva is to reach out to people who are seeking a relationship with divine, a relationship with one another, a relationship between prayer and action, and to open the doors wide enough that there are very few barriers to entry. So I don't know about the word judgment, but I would say wide open spaces.
So you found this group.
Yes.
You started holding monthly, every one Friday night a month,
Yes.
sort of spiritual ceremonies. You don't use the same language as you would in the traditional Jewish faith.
Well, yeah, we have
ceremonies on Friday nights.
We have a band, and it's very high energy, and we do also meditation, which is very deep, and the band itself is interfaith and multiracial. And although I would say certainly the majority of people who come to Nashuva are Jewish, we certainly have people coming who aren't Jewish, who are just seeking a way home to finding a way to connect their soul to the soul of all souls.
So at some point, it was before you founded Nashuva, you decided you wanted to be an author. Mm-hmm. And you wrote the book To Begin Again. Mm-hmm. What made you think you could write two? She's a rabbi, she's in the first graduating class, and she can write too. What made you think you could do that, Naomi?
It's funny. When I started in rabbinical school, the very first class you have to take is called Homiletics 101. And a homily is a sermon. So, Sermon Writing 101. And the first day, the professor, who's a rabbi, said, I want you all to take out a piece of paper and I want you all to write a sermon. And at the end, we're going to figure out who belongs in this class, who belongs in remedial writing. Start writing. And then whatever you write, you'll be delivering in front of the class. So I was so sure that I would be placed in remedial writing, and I was so petrified to have to deliver anything in front of the class that I just froze. I froze, and I didn't write anything. And I just folded this blank piece of paper at the end where everybody's handing it in. And I went straight to my dean's office and I said, just listen to me carefully. I will never deliver a sermon in my life. I don't want to be a congregational rabbi. So please don't make me take this class. I don't want to take this class. And he said, all right. So I wasn't writing sermons all through rabbinical school because I was sure I wanted to go more into academics than into congregational work. And then I moved to LA, and the very first thing I do is take a congregation. And it really was the act of writing sermons every week, a Friday night sermon, a Saturday morning sermon, that I started to love writing. And I never really tested myself in that way. And for me, my congregants became sort of the scripts of sermons. Their journeys, their heroic journeys became sort of like the biblical texts that I was using to share lessons about the human spirit. And after about 6 years in the congregation, I already knew that I was going to write a book. I think part of it was when I had started, I was 26 years old. When I had started in that congregation, I still felt in some ways alone, or that what I had endured in my life was so unusual that I was carrying this weight still. And there I was counseling people who had been through the Holocaust, counseling women who had been raped, counseling people who had gone through horrific cancer treatments. And I realized that we're all in this together. And I knew I would write a book about finding your way back to life in the wake of a tragedy. And after 7 years in the congregation, I decided to leave to write that first book.
And in that book, you also talk about the loss of your own father. That had to be difficult in some aspects to go that deep. And I also,
But it was cathartic.
But it was cathartic.
Oh, yes.
So in all your books, you really touch on things that have happened to you in your own life. In your third book, Hope Will Find You, My Search for the Wisdom to Stop Waiting and Start Living, you talk about how you dealt with the serious illness of your daughter.
Yeah.
She had a...
And again, she became my teacher. She became my Zen master. She became my inspiration. And the title of the book actually is her words. And it was actually at her bat mitzvah. I asked her, she had to read a section from the prophet Isaiah. And I asked her, what does this mean to you? And she said, Mom, I think what it's saying is if you're going through a really hard time, or if you don't like your life, just be patient because you will find hope. And then she took a double take and she went, no, Mom, hope will find you. And I couldn't breathe when my daughter said those words, because for so long we'd been fearing the worst about her outcome.
She had a potentially fatal degenerative disorder.
They just didn't know what it was.
Right.
And
she's okay now, we want to point out.
Yes,
she's 21 and doing great.
She's doing remarkably well, and we now do know what she has. And it's not degenerative. But here she was saying, hope will find you. And it sounded almost biblical to me. I felt like I'd heard that before in my life. And I realized that it reminded me of the 23rd Psalm, which is a psalm that both Jews and Christians recite. And it says, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. And it's not really a great translation. Really, it means surely goodness and mercy will pursue me, will chase after me all the days of my life. And I realized that my daughter Noah, what she was saying was, sometimes we think we have to hold on. We have to hold on for hope. And what I took from what she said was, no. What we need to do is stop long enough and open wide enough, because hope's looking for us. And it's personal. And it's a different art form. It's a different spiritual practice to believe that the universe isn't conspiring against you, that life is working for you, and you just have to cooperate.
Naomi, it's hard enough to get a book published if you're you're a famous person and you're writing a biography or an autobiography. How did you go about getting these books published? Is there, your books deal with spirituality, and they're deep and profound and full of wisdom. Were they hard to get published? Including your latest one, Einstein and the Rabbi, which we'll get into in a moment.
I sent my book to several agents. Not my book. I sent an idea for a book to several agents when I was in my 7th year at the congregation at Mishkan Tefillah in Venice. And many of them said, I love because basically what I sent them were, I think, 4 sermons. And they would say, oh, I love your sermons, but I don't see a book here. I love your sermons. I don't see a book here. And then I sent it to one agent.
Now, wait a sec. When you heard that, were you like, what kept you from going, well, they know what they're talking about? Shh.
You know what? I think it's also, I just had a sense that I had a story to tell. And I sent it to several agents and, again, just thank you for sending it. I don't see a book here. And then this one agent, the minute I sent it to her, within 24 hours, she said, I want to represent you. And it turned out that, some of these other agents who were lower level agents might have taken weeks to get back to me. She is one of the most powerful women in the publishing industry. And she got back to me. I think that just shows you what success is all about, because successful people move quickly when they have an instinct. And she said, I want to publish you, and this is going to happen. And I, within a week of leaving my congregation, I had a book contract. Within a week.
It's unbelievable. I love that story so much.
Because doors open.
Well, doors open, but so often I hate to exclude men from this and make SheSez about only the women, but it so is, because so many women, myself included in life, when I've heard no, I said, well, they just must know what they're talking about. And then I hear another no, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure they're right. And the third no, and I'm done. And the truth of the matter is the sort of noteworthy times in my life, and this happens, I'm using myself, but I hear this a lot with women, that I really succeeded was when I got repeated no's and I just kept going. Like, okay, no from you, no from you, no from you, no from you. And then you find the one person that says yes. One person that says yes and believes in you.
Yes.
And you just go, bingo.
Yes.
We need to, as women, particularly as women, in this chapter of our lives, post-kids, post when anything's possible, we need to learn to step over people who say no. And I don't mean that in a mean or disrespectful way. We just need to keep going on. You say no, great. Next, until we hear that yes. When we really believe in something like you did about your books.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And the flip side is that the people who are very successful, you can sense why. I understood now why Esther Newberg is successful, because she has a sense of things and she moves quickly. Mm-hmm. Like she just knew.
Mm-hmm. Now, was she your book publisher on all 4?
My agent.
Agent, excuse me, on all 4?
She's been my agent for 20 years.
Wow.
And I just adore her. And she's one of the top agents in publishing. And I'm a tiny, as I say, I'm like a tiny, like crumb on her plate of the kinds of authors that she generally, I'm a little rabbi. Yeah. And she represents, Caroline Kennedy. Yeah.
And by the way, you're a publisher, not your agent. You've had some major publishers too, Doubleday, Flatiron Books. I mean, those are major companies. She's getting you in you some good deals, girlfriend.
Thank you, Esther. I love you, Esther.
So I want to tell you that I started this book, and you just got me from the very beginning. And what I'd like to have you do is read this passage just from here to this paragraph here.
Wait, say from where?
In chapter 2, just when you start to tell this story. Here, I marked it in my book, so you can read it. Oh. Starting here and just going to the end right here. Mm-hmm. This would be your last sentence. Mm-hmm. Because this really kind of got me into it, just from the very beginning. So if you don't mind, go ahead.
It's my honor. 3 years ago, I began to feel the presence of another soul tugging at me. This time, it wasn't the soul of a loved one. It was the soul of a man I'd never even met. I didn't see it coming. I was just minding my own business. I was doing research for a class called Oneness. I wanted to teach my students to see the ways we are all interconnected. The living, the dead, animals, rocks, all of creation. I was going to share with them the metaphor I used when I first taught my children about the soul and about what happens to the soul after death. I'd say, we're all part of a cosmic soup. A soup like chicken soup, they'd say. No, thicker, I'd reply. Like a vegetable soup? No, I'd say. More like a stew. That's been my metaphor for our place in eternity. I believe that the physical world we perceive is actually part of a spiritual world that's as close to us as our own breath. We're all part of a churning cosmic stew, surrounded by souls we cannot see. And that same stream of eternity runs through us and through everything around us. One afternoon, as I was piecing together material for my class, I stumbled upon a description of our relationship to the universe by Albert Einstein. A human being is part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. The striving to free oneself from this delusion is the one issue of true religion. Not to nourish the delusion, but to try to overcome it is the way to reach the attainable measure of peace of mind. Einstein's exquisite words stopped me in my tracks. He was expressing everything I believed about our limited vision and about the oneness we have trouble seeing, but that we're all part of. Einstein was describing the mystical teachings I'd been studying for years, the narrow mind and the expansive mind, the world of separation and the world of unity that we all have access to. Yes, I thought, we are living in a state of blindness. When we feel alone, we're wrong. Einstein's words reaffirmed everything I'd come to see in my own experience. Einstein was saying that we're all part of a greater whole, all things. And it's our delusion of separateness that causes us so much pain and confusion and loneliness, when in reality, all things are connected and intertwined.
I thought that the letter from the Einstein letter was so interesting because here he is, a scientist, a physicist, and the letter is mystical.
Yeah. I found it so fascinating that a rabbi in a spiritual crisis turns to a scientist for comfort. And what Einstein's saying is so important for our own day. We're all part of a whole. Mm-hmm. And we see ourselves as separate, but it's merely an optical delusion. And he's saying this not as a mystic, and he's saying it not as a Buddhist. He's saying it as a physicist convinced of the unity of all things.
What did you learn from writing this book?
I learned that there's a piece within us called the soul that has the power to see the way Einstein was describing. I know our eyes can't see that. Our eyes don't see that. Our eyes see black and white, Jew, non-Jew, limited, narrow, constricted things. But there's a piece within us, the rabbis say, the soul can see from one end of the world to the other. And unfortunately, there are so many voices in our lives that shout at us. Voices from the outside telling us what we should be doing, judgmental voices, advertising voices, voices telling us what real beauty is, what youth is, what
success is.
What success is. Mm-hmm. And then there are internal voices, internal judges, the ego's vanities, the body's hungers. But there's a voice within us that knows why we were put here. And it speaks to us in a whisper. And we are experts at running from that voice. We're experts at ignoring that voice. And if we can figure out a way to raise its volume, then it will give us answers and it will provide us wisdom in the realm of love, soulmate, calling, and our true life path.
Naomi, we end each episode of She Says with takeaways for our listeners, things that they might think about and apply to their own lives after the episode is over. As a woman who was one of our first female rabbis, as someone who went down an unconventional path and founded a spiritual community that is thriving, from what I understand, from someone who has written 4 books about your own wisdom and spiritualities, and again, non-conventional ways of thinking when you're talking about the realm of conventional religion. What can we take away from your story?
I would say, my sisters, don't underestimate yourself. Never underestimate yourself. Believe in yourself. You're beautiful. You're wise. You're strong. You're powerful. You're capable. Help out others, women and men. Understand that you have a vision within you that can see from one end of the world to the other. Trust yourself. Trust your instincts. Know that doors open. And the question is, can you see the opening? But the bigger question is, are you ready to seize that opening? Seize it. It's yours. It's been placed there for you. Enter it in blessing, in health, and in joy. Amen.
Naomi Levy, I've enjoyed every minute of having you here. I need to talk to you on a weekly basis.
Okay.
I need to hear that little part very often. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And thank you for listening. We so appreciate it. If you get a minute, go tap that icon on your home phone screen. Am I using the right lingo there? And give us a rating and a review. We'd so much appreciate the feedback. Thank you.